Welcome to Exhibit A. Today we've got a very interesting case concerning a variety of factors that are going to play with domestic violence, breaches of fiduciary duty, spousal support, and what constitutes a documented evidence of domestic violence. All these things are going to be really informative and important for people that are going into court with domestic violence issues or just spousal support issues or maybe even child custody. With us, we've got Victoria, and she's going to lead the way in letting us know what this case is all about. Tori, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Don?
Good, good. This is one of our first podcasts of the year, believe it or not. Here we are in April filming right now, and it's been a while, so we've got to get these things rolling. There's been a lot of appellate court decisions published in 2024. I wanted you to talk with me about this one because I thought this was the best one that I've seen so far that has real meaning to not only the people out there that are going through divorces, but also the practitioners. We practitioners like to read all the cases that have a real direct application of things we're working on and something that could be very useful in the future. So let's go at it. Okay, what's the name of the case?
So I already turned from the first page here. The case is Gilbert Valencia versus McKean.
Right.
Am I saying that last name correctly?
Yeah, and from what I could tell, it's a Sacramento case. And so why don't you kind of give the facts? These facts are interesting. I love these type of cases. Tell me about them.
All right. So we have these parties are expected to be married. They obtain a marriage license in 2008. Husband fails to mention, though, that he's currently married.
What? Unbeknownst to wife.
Unbeknownst to wife, he is still married to somebody else. So in 2011, he officially finalizes that divorce. But in between 2008 and 2011, he purchases a house in 2009. He purchases that home in his name alone as an unmarried man. And there's some facts in here as to why wife is agreeable to that arrangement.
So he's kind of lying, double lying.
Yeah.
Because not only is he married to wife number one, but he's kind of married to wife number two, and he's purchasing a home as a single man in between the two marriages.
Yeah, he's certainly not an unmarried man, right?
Yeah. So just to keep it really simple for our viewers, because this type of stuff you could lose track of what we're talking about. We've got a case where a man is not divorced. He's separated from his first wife. He marries wife number two, but he forgets to tell her about it. And then after he marries wife number two, and before he divorces wife number one, he buys a house, right, as an unmarried man. So that's what we got for right now. You might think that this is far-fetched, but we got lots of appellate court decisions like this. We see cases like this every once in a while as well. So that's where we're at right now. What else do we need to know?
So then they officially have a wedding ceremony in 2011.
Him and second wife?
Him and second wife officially have their marriage ceremony.
And why does he say he needs a second marriage?
He's got to change his last name.
Right, so he still doesn't tell her.
Yeah.
He still doesn't tell her that, hey, you know what? I secretly got divorced from wife number one. He says, babe, let's have another ceremony because I want to change my last name.
Let's make it really official.
Okay, then what happens?
So in 2016, they separate. And he then sells that home in 2017.
But who files for divorce?
He files for divorce, no?
That's right, yeah. So they separate in 2016. He files for divorce, and then in 2017, what happens?
He sells that home that he purchased way back in 2009 in his name alone. And we know is a violation of the ATRO's automatic temporary restraining orders. And then he goes and spends all these proceeds on personal expenses, the court says. They don't get into the details.
Can you explain in layman's term what the ATROs are and what they roughly paraphrase what they say?
Yeah, so essentially when you file for divorce and you serve the other party, there's temporary restraining orders that go into effect that basically prohibit certain activities. For example, you can't sell community property, you can't unilaterally get rid of community property funds, you can't change beneficiaries. It's basically a stay on your financial orders until the case is finalized. There's some additional ATROs with respect to pets and some other things in there.
Kids.
Yeah, kids. Yeah. Can't travel out of the state if I recall correctly.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So what Tori's talking about is at the back of the summons, there are these automatic temporary restraining orders. And in our world, we refer to them as atros. And it's not something that a judge has actually just recently signed off on. They're called automatic because they're on the Judicial Council form. A lot of people don't know that they're there when they're going through the divorce. They should know that. They should read the papers, especially if you're the petitioner. But as soon as he signs the petition for divorce and he files it with the court, he's subject to those atros. That means that he can't do these things like hide, cheat, steal, borrow against, right? And when the respondent, in this case the wife, receives those papers, then she's subject to these automatic temporary restraining orders. So in this case, you're saying that they were there, the atros were there like every divorce, and then he tiptoes around and without telling her, he sells the house. And then what does he do with the money?
He spends it all.
Oh boy. Okay.
Gets rid of all the money and
All right. Well, what happens next?
So then, not surprisingly, they have a contempt issue here.
No.
To add another layer of complication. So in January 2018, wife files a contempt against husband. There's multiple counts of contempt in here, but it says 3 counts to failure to abide court orders with respect to his preliminary declaration disclosure.
Okay. And this is a lesson that people need to know is if you violate the atros, it's not just a slap on the hand. I mean, you could be charged criminally with contempt of court. And this wife and her attorney weren't playing around here. They filed contempt against him.
They also have a count to abide by a subpoena, but really she pleads, one of the pleads in the contempt is the home being sold. Ultimately, they enter into a stipulation, and that we'll talk about that later in the case as we continue to chat. But they enter into a stipulation, and they essentially settle that claim. I don't know if settle is the right word with respect to a contempt or the expert.
Well, like a lot of contempts, if I got this right, he pled no contest to 4 counts of contempt, including 3 counts of failure to obey the court orders on his preliminary declarations of disclosures and 1 count for failure to obey a deposition subpoena. And then, the other counts were dismissed. So he did enter a nolo contendere or, plea of no contest, which in family court is equivalent to a guilty plea, just like it is in criminal court these days.
But with respect to the sale of the home in violation of the atros, she basically enters into a stipulation to waive those contempt charges.
And before we go, because I know what part you're going to go to next about the language of that, pursuant to the stipulation, the family court places husband on probation for 1 year and orders him to pay attorney's fees to the wife. So he didn't get off scot-free here.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a plea, and I think that we should always remember that contempt in family court is primarily there to get people to start obeying court orders and to ring a bell, get their attention, and say, we're not playing games here. You are subject to the rules just like everybody else. So it looks like the wife and the wife's attorney had the right goal in mind. They dismissed some counts, they made him plead to 4 of them, and then he's on probation, meaning that if he has any further violations of the law, that the court could say, you know what, I'm going to sentence you for this according to the penal code. Okay, so now you're going to talk to me about what?
So then what we find is, let's say contempt's handled over here, but here's another remedy, a breach of fiduciary duty with respect to selling the home and basically expending all those proceeds without any proper division. So the court actually awards wife 100% of the net sale proceeds with respect to the home that he sold.
What? Wait a minute, this guy, he screwed up, but did he screw up that? You mean he doesn't have his house anymore?
Has no house and
okay, and that's pursuant to what code section?
The home or the breach of fiduciary duty?
Breach of fiduciary duty.
Let's see, Family Code 1100G, if I recall correctly.
1101.
1101.
It's actually what the court had to have done in order to make that order is find that he was in violation of 1101H. Oh. Now, in the Family Code, there's a difference between 1101G and 1101H.
And yes, that's what the case is going to.
Yeah. So this was H, the H bomb. Boom. And she gets all of the house, and guess what? There's no offset. And you're gonna have to pay for all of her attorney's fees. What's he got left now? I mean, the poor guy, he was kind of a skunk, okay, but he took everything from me. So what happens next?
So he appeals. He says, wait a minute, this isn't right.
Wait, you're forgetting about something.
What am I forgetting
Spousal
here?
support.
Oh, yes. Well, they also make an order with respect to spousal support. And they had made an order in 2019, it sounds like, and they issue a new support order in 2021.
And that's for the husband to pay the wife,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And he says, wait a minute. What about the domestic violence?
Yeah.
Right?
The appeals level. So he appeals both.
Wait, let's talk about this. You want to get to the appeal right away. I want to get to the juicy part. So he's saying, you know what, Judge? I know that spousal support's at issue, but you should be considering the fact that she committed domestic violence against moi.
Yeah.
And when you determine that, that's going to be a basis for you to say, you know what? There should be no spousal support or less spousal support because the family code provides that, right? If you make that finding. And what does the trial court say?
The trial court says, you guys settled the domestic violence issue. I'm not here on a domestic violence hearing. Stop bringing it up, and basically, withholds all, sustains all the objections by wife's counsel.
Okay. And then he says, and my order remains regarding the property, and you're going to have to pay spousal support. Then he appeals, right? The husband appeals?
Yes.
Okay.
So essentially, the husband appeals and says, well, we have the stipulation, and per the terms of the stipulation, she basically waived any breach of fiduciary duty claim against me.
Right.
And the court says, the appeals court says, we're going to take a closer look at that stipulation and review the language as a whole, and basically finds that the language was really only pertaining to the contempt itself. It wasn't anything to suggest that wife was going to waive any future breach of fiduciary duty claims or have anything to do with the division of the community property.
You said that very well. You said that very well. Yeah. It doesn't have anything to do with the breach of fiduciary duty claims or the division of property. It was just related to the contempt. So that waiver doesn't help you, sir.
Yeah.
One of the things we should probably pause on, Tori, because I know that the decision wasn't largely on this, because I don't even know if it was how much it was contested. But here we have a woman who is not legally married, and she's receiving spousal support, and she's receiving a division of property, right? So what do we call her?
A putative spouse.
Right. So she's a putative spouse, and people, I think, get a tickle. I certainly do every time I read one of these decisions like this, where he gets no rights, by the way. So if he wanted spousal support, too bad, too sad. If she had earned income and put it into a bank account, too bad, because he's the wrongdoer.
Right.
But she, as the putative spouse, is entitled to all of the marital benefits, right? So in this case, the court reaffirmed that law and said that she was truly a putative spouse. She didn't know. Now, there is a little bit of a wrinkle sometimes if the putative spouse learns that he is, that he's committed bigamy and then continues on with the marriage. But in this case, she didn't know until the divorce, apparently. So I think our viewers should know that that's what's going on here. So she gets spousal support.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're going to talk to me about the domestic violence, right?
Well, do we want to go back to the section regarding breach of fiduciary duty with respect to G and H?
Yeah.
Because you're the one who taught me actually the clarification between there. So I think if I understand correctly, G is just a breach of fiduciary duty. Or sorry, H is.
Well, let me make it clear. 1101 is the breach of fiduciary duty code within the California Family Code. G states that if the court makes a finding that there's a breach of fiduciary duty, such as, hey, you sold property without advising the client, or the other spouse, because married people have a duty of a fiduciary duty towards each other all the way up until the time that they're divorced. They can't transfer, they can't steal, they can't hypothecate, they can't do any funny business with property. Well, in this case, the court says, you know what, you sold this house without notifying her. That was not only contempt of court, but it was also a breach of your fiduciary duty. So I'm going to penalize you, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make you pay for her attorney's fees. Now that's 1101G says that if there is, the court can, I think it may even say shall, order that attorney's fees will be paid, and then the value of one half of the asset that was, stolen or whatever. Like in this case, the house is sold. So whatever half that value was of the community, whatever half the community had in it, she would be entitled. That's G. Now, H says if there's a finding of malice, meaning that the perpetrator did it maliciously, then it's the H bomb, right? That means that the entire asset goes to the other spouse without an offset. Plus, you got to pay for attorney's fees. And that's apparently what the court did here. The trial court said, you know what, you did this, and I'm giving it all to her without an offset, and you're going to pay attorney's fees. So what did the Court of Appeal think about the trial court's decision there.
There was no finding of malice. So they're saying H is not correct here. We're in G. You know, it's 50% of the asset. It wasn't correct to award 100% because in this case there was no finding of malice, oppression, fraud, so forth and so on, and that the proper award was 50% of the asset.
So let me ask you, what type of situation can you think of where there's a showing of malice?
I was trying to think about this actually, and I was trying to think if we've had any cases that I could pull on, and I can't think of anything in particular. I suppose maybe fraud, maybe doing it. I don't know. I'm trying to think like what facts would.
How about deceiving a spouse? You know, you're not only just selling something, but what you're doing is you're purposely deceiving the other side. The claim that the asset was here,
Right.
and so something. There's got to be some kind of a.
Right.
You know what it is? It's kind of like a specific intent.
Yeah.
You know, element here. You have to go above just
Right.
doing the bad act. You've got to have something. There's a mens rea component of it, right? Malice, right?
Right. Yeah, I could see you saying I don't even know if this would warrant, but maybe the house is worth. I say the house sold for this much, but it really sold for this much, and I'm
There you
pocketing
go.
fees
Yeah.
or something. There, then you might have a
Real,
malice or fraud.
real deceit, right?
Yeah.
Or you do something that's going to harm the community out of spite,
Yeah.
right? You know, you're entitled to, $500,000 for the sale of the home, and you go off and you sell it for $1, and you don't
Right.
care because you want to hurt the other side. That would be pretty malicious, I would think.
That's a really good example.
Okay, so there's this component. In this case, the court didn't even try to make a finding,
No.
and so that's why it was overruled.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we're at the domestic violence portion.
Yes.
So here, I think we kind of touched on it already as to the facts, right? At the trial court level, they're having a hearing with respect to property division and spousal support. And husband had introduced evidence that they had these competing restraining orders. He had filed a request for restraining order. But at this particular hearing, he says, "Look, Judge, I have this video of wife kicking me, of committing domestic violence."
Why would that constitute domestic violence?
The kicking?
I thought wives were entitled to kick their husbands.
Well, here's the thing: the trial court makes no findings of domestic
Okay.
violence, right? They say we're not making any findings today, and they even write in the order, there was no finding of domestic violence. I can't
Yeah.
remember the specific language.
Yeah,
but
so he says, we're not going to hear a
Yeah.
domestic violence hearing, but then
Yeah.
he makes a finding that there was no evidence of it.
yes, yeah.
Ooh, okay.
And then, of course, as you've already alluded to, that impacts spousal support. So husbands is appealing, saying there's an error here. You needed to consider this evidence, and the appeals court agrees with husband that this should have been considered. And even though that they had settled the domestic violence restraining orders, I believe through stipulation, it sounds like that's still the evidence of domestic violence should have been considered with respect to spousal support at that hearing.
Yeah, so I looked at the code, and what the court did is it relied on not only 4320 of the Family Code, subsection I, which deals with the court looking to see whether there was a domestic violence and making a finding, but it used 4325 as documented evidence of a writing, right? And then it looked at a case called Brewster versus Clevenger to find out what does that mean for domestic documented evidence, because the court, apparently somebody, it must have been the husband or the wife, was probably alleging, well, there was no documented evidence. It was just a video. So the court was correct. And the Court of Appeal said what?
That the court was incorrect, that they should have considered the video. It falls under the code section with respect to documented evidence.
Pursuant to Brewster and Clevenger, interpreting 4325, a video is documented evidence. Now, one thing that I learned from this here, I learned a couple of things from this case, though, is that you have to have documented evidence. It's just in order to rebut, in order to impact spousal support, apparently, you can't just testify and the court believe you. You got to have documented evidence.
Right.
I thought that was interesting. And so we got videos. What else would be documented evidence? Text messages.
Text messages, yeah, that's a great example. I suppose third-party statements aren't going to be documented.
Medical
evidence.
records.
Medical records, yeah. Photographs.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what. And in this case, he had a video.
Yeah.
Right. And so the court's saying, the trial court erred here because it totally said, nope, sorry, we're not going to have a restraining order hearing here. And that's not what was being offered. It was saying, look, I know that I dismissed that,
Right.
but I still want to use this domestic violence so that I don't have to pay this spousal support.
Yeah.
So we learned something from this decision that a lot of people don't know, and that is that even though a restraining order may not succeed, you may not prevail in getting one, or you may dismiss it. That doesn't do away with the prior acts of domestic violence. And those prior acts can be brought back into court for two main reasons. What are they?
Spousal support and then child custody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we know from a case last year that there's a time period that the court has to consider domestic violence, and it's 5 years from the time that the court made the ruling. But in that decision, the court says that doesn't mean that you can't use those acts that were outside for the purpose of custody. So these things never go away.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a good reminder that people are not off scot-free because of stipulations and things like that. That there's documented evidence of domestic violence. You may not be pursuing a restraining order or defending against one, but they're going to be relevant.
Yeah. I also think, just from a practice standpoint, right, issuing subpoenas, making sure you are pursuing that evidence, even if your client is inclined to settle or whatever it may be, it's still helpful for the future. And so just issue those subpoenas, get that documented evidence.
Taking the deposition,
Yeah.
make your case. You make a good point. Your client may not want to spend the money on a restraining order. A lot of times they might say, I don't think I need one because I don't think he's going to do anything further at this point.
Right.
But I do have evidence during the marriage of domestic violence. You're right. A workup of that, you should not ignore that evidence. Wow. What a great case. Is there anything else we need to talk about in this case? Any other lessons that you learned?
I think so. Let me skim my notes here.
Well, what about maybe you should get divorced before you
Yeah,
remarry?
let's start there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was a really good case.
Okay. Too bad we don't have photographs. We have to ask David, man, to give us some photographs of this, the guy selling his house secret. Good luck trying to, maybe with AI they could find generate some stuff for that. So thank you very much for joining us at Exhibit A, and we will see you next time.